Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Now, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of discussion about possible NATO, Western European, and even possibly U.S. intervention in the conflict. So why are we hearing more about possible Western European intervention, meaning France, possibly the United Kingdom, the United States? It doesn't seem at this point the Germans are willing to get into this. But why are we hearing this? Well, the Western Alliance, the NATO alliance, the United States, firmly now believes that the only way the Ukrainians will see victory would be the direct intervention of Western military powers, France, the United States. Now, if there is such an intervention, would that lead to a Ukrainian victory? It depends. It depends on how much the United States, France, the United Kingdom desires to commit. If they are looking at providing local air coverage, the continuing use of Western supplies to the Ukrainians, and quite possibly even using Poland and Romania as launching points for direct air attacks against Russian forces. That ultimately will not lead to a Ukrainian victory. It may slow things down, but the root cause of a Russian victory is going to be the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation, compounded with its ability to generate large pools of manpower with its 145 million person population. And that's a simple fact. Now, we often hear about the reported use of older Russian armored vehicles, that the Russians are starting to use older equipment. But today I want to just show you two different pictures of something you will not see in Western mainstream media. They won't show it to you. They will show you a Russian T-62 tank being prepared for possible military operations, but they won't show you this. You don't get the other side of the picture of what's happening, and I want to show you that. So first, these two gentlemen. So obviously these are older Ukrainian soldiers. I'm guessing the gentleman here to the right is pushing 70 years old, at least 60. The gentleman to the left, obviously a bit younger, difficult to say. Now, what is this? That's a World War I Maxim machine gun. It's being used by the Ukrainians. Have you seen that on CNN yet? Have they talked about this photograph? Here's a more recent one. Now, this is a very interesting photograph. This says a lot. Look at the age of these newly recruited Ukrainian soldiers. How do you know that they're newly recruited? Look at their kit. Everything is brand new. Weapons, the uniforms, helmets, everything. Brand spanking new. And then look at the age of each one of these gentlemen. This guy may be in his 30s, late 20s. This individual here, maybe early 30s, late 20s. But the rest of these gentlemen are most likely pushing 40 plus. If I were to show you a picture of, let's say, recent graduation ceremonies from the U.S. military, they look much younger than this. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds. The Russians are in the same boat as well. They're not this old, and by and large, they're younger than what we're seeing from the Ukrainians being fielded. Won't see this in the mainstream media, but it's the truth. It exists. So as they talk about Russian T-62 main battle tanks being pressed into service, well, the same thing is happening with the Ukrainians. World War I machine gun. Now, back to the thought process around NATO intervention and why that would have to lead to ultimately World War III. Localized NATO assistance coming from Poland, Romania, again, using these countries as staging grounds to attack Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, is not going to negate the Russian advantage and growing advantage. It's important to look east of Moscow. So from the Ukrainian border to Moscow, you're 400 plus kilometers. Hundreds of kilometers east of Moscow, you have the Russian military-industrial complex. Factories that produce aircraft, tanks, weapons, helmets, equipment that are used in war. And they're in all these Russian cities. Any Russian city, and these are hundreds of kilometers east of Moscow. The United States would have to strike these cities. Again, in order to see a Ukrainian victory and ultimately an all-out war between NATO or individual Western nation states deciding to directly assist the Ukrainians, would have to ultimately lead to direct strikes on these industrial sites in eastern Russia and central Russia. How would the U.S. do that? Well, the only real option for the U.S. to hit, especially hundreds of miles east of Moscow, would be the use of the B-2 bomber. The B-2 would have to cross into Russian airspace and then launch long-range cruise missiles against Russian infrastructure targets. They would have to do it. It's impossible for the NATO alliance to ultimately defeat the Russian Federation without going after these industrial targets. They would have to. And what would that lead to? Well, again, the Third World War. The Russians would undoubtedly then attack Western Europe with tactical weapons. Cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, long-range cruise missiles, long-range kamikaze drones. It would simply escalate. And then if the Russians believed at some point that the West was successfully targeting these industrial sites east of Moscow, and it appeared that the Russians could lose its war in Ukraine, then the Russians would escalate to tactical nuclear weapons. And then the question is, would the West then respond with its own use of tactical nuclear weapons? Now, I've not even addressed the sea domain. The idea that Russian cruise missile submarines, nuclear cruise missile submarines, nuclear attack submarines, nuclear attack boats would be roaming the seas and attacking U.S. and NATO maritime interests. If there was a direct attack by the United States against targets east of Moscow, which, if war breaks out between the United States and Russia, the United States would have to do that in order to successfully prosecute a war. It would have to attack the military-industrial capacity of Russia. That's going to be very difficult. The Russians are going to respond. You would probably see Russian cruise missile strikes on targets in Alaska, and quite possibly even targets on the continental United States from Russian subsurface warfare capability. And then ultimately, if tactical nuclear weapons and strategic nuclear weapons are used, the situation would spiral out of control. So that's where we sit today. Again, the likelihood of a Ukrainian victory without direct support from the Western Alliance is incredibly low. The incompetent diversity, equity, and inclusion hire Secretary of Defense is outright stating that if Russia defeats Ukraine, it would lead to World War III. Well, the only way for that not to happen at this point would be the direct intervention of the Western Alliance. And we're not even really looking at possible escalation with North Korea, Iran, China against Taiwan. This could get insane. So I just wanted to have a discussion on that as we continue to watch what is happening on the front lines, as we continue to watch the Russians advance from east to west deeper into Ukraine, as the Ukrainian army is getting older and less equipped. More to come. Thank you for joining us as always. Have a good day.